I have a very good friend. I'm going to share a little bit of his testimony with you. After you hear this testimony, you may be tempted to Google his name. By all means, Google his name. Do not believe everything you read about him on the internet. He did not assassinate JFK, nor did he assassinate Martin Luther King. But what is true is that Thomas Terrants III ran one of the most successful terrorist cells in all North American history. Tom Terrants was at a school in Alabama, in the Southern America, which was the first school in America to be desegregated. And they took black American children and put them on buses and bussed them into his school. And he saw them arrive, and he was angry about it. And he became increasingly angry about it. He felt it was wrong, and it violated the natural order of things. So he was attracted to join an organization called the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan. Some of you may have heard of them. But he didn't like the Ku Klux Klan because he felt they were a bit too liberal. The trouble with the Ku Klux Klan is they said a lot of talk but not a lot of action. So then he found a group called the White Knights of the Ku Klux Klan. Now this group he liked. Because not only were they prepared to speak about that which they felt was wrong, they were prepared to act on it. And they killed, and they arsoned, and they shot people. They set crosses on fire on people's lawns. And their reign of terror grew and grew and grew. Until an American man by the name of Edgar Hoover, you may have seen, there's a film made about him recently, who was head of the CIA and of the FBI, decided that he needed to eliminate Tom Terrants because it was becoming an irritant to him. So what Edgar Hoover did is he took a group of spies, American spies, who had been trained on how to turn people into double agents who were working in the United Nations. I'm sure this doesn't happen today, by the way. But they've been trained to work at the UN to infiltrate Russian groups and communist groups and turn them around to become double agents for the American government. He took that team out of the UN, sent it down to the Southern America to find Tom Terrants' organization, infiltrate it, turn some of them around to become double agents for the government, and then they'll set up an operation to have Tom Terrants killed. And that's precisely what they did. Now you can read some of this stuff online because under the American Freedom of Information Act, all these documents have now been released. So if you want to read all of the history, you can. Well, they went down and they infiltrated his organization. They were very well trained. And one day, Tom Terrants arrived in a car being driven by a 21-year-old primary school teacher to deliver a bomb into a Jewish businessman's house. And as he's walking up the drive in the middle of the night to deliver this bomb, 26 men who've been posted on rooftops and are hiding in bushes open fire and start shooting at him because they've been sent to take him out. The plan was not to capture him, the plan was to have him killed. Now, by the way, this was a very controversial operation because apparently the American CIA is not meant to kill American citizens on American soil. But there are lots of things they're not meant to do. So I guess that's okay. And just in case you're listening, let me just say how much I love you. So, he dropped the bomb, which didn't go off somehow, and made it back into the car. Now this does imply that these 26 men may have needed a bit more training. As he drove away, the lady next to him took a bullet in her neck, collapsed into his lap, and died 30 seconds later. But he sped off. Now, they'd hidden cars in the houses all around the one he was trying to blow up, so as he drove away, they chased him down the street. If my memory serves me correctly, and I'll need to check, you'll have to check this online, I think they fired something like 247 rounds of ammunition into his car. Now, that's a testimony to American engineering. Eventually, it stopped. He grabbed the Uzi on the seat next to him, and as he came out of the car, he sprayed the car behind him with bullets. The first policeman who was coming out of the car saw what was happened, and he ducked and managed to miss the spray. The second policeman was turning on his heel. He couldn't duck, and he took a bullet straight into the heart. Now, when the clip emptied, the first guy stood up and shot Tom twice with a shotgun. But then instead of coming to kill him, as were his orders, he went to his partner and started beating on his chest, managed to get his heart beating and saved his life. And in that moment of confusion, Tom escaped. But he was bleeding badly. So they came with torches and they came with dogs. They found him hiding in a bush, and when they found him, they turned the lights off and they opened fire at almost point-blank range. Now, what was happening was he was lying on his side, and a lot of the shot from the shotguns was just passing over his chest. But if you ever see a picture of him with his shirt not on, you see most of his chest is missing. When they turned the lights back on, he was still breathing. They were convinced he was going to die, but one of them produced a gun and held it to his head, and at that point an ambulance crew arrived. No one had called for them. They'd just seen the flashes of light, they'd heard the gunfire, they'd come to see if they could help. They led him into the ambulance. Everyone was sure he was going to die. Well, he didn't die. They operated several operations. They managed to save his life. Eventually, he was strong enough to stand trial. He stood trial. There was a big scandal in North America about it because of the nature of the operation, and he was sent to a maximum security prison in Alabama. Now, after 6 months of being in a maximum security prison, he decided he didn't like the accommodation the American government had given him, so he got together with some friends and he left. He rejoined his old unit. He didn't realize it had been infiltrated by the government. As soon as he rejoined it, they betrayed his location. And one day, he's standing guard at a camp they've got in the middle of a swamp. And a friend comes and relieves him half an hour early, and he goes back inside. And as he goes back inside, there is the most enormous firefight. They came, I think, with hundreds of men, every kind of armament you can think out. His friend was literally vaporized in what happened. And then they turned on a loudspeaker. They said, "You have 30 seconds to come out, or we open fire." And he knew there was no point. He came out, he surrendered himself to them. He was put back in jail. He was given another 5 years and put in solitary confinement. Hoover recommended he should spend every single day in solitary. Now, after a little while of being let outside once a week for just 20 minutes, he started to ask for books to read. The first book he asked to read was called Mein Kampf by a guy called Adolf Hitler. Then he started to read other books. And then eventually he thought, you know what, I should try reading the Bible. After all, he thought, I'm a good Southern Baptist. That's what we do. So he asked for a Bible to be brought to his cell. And he sat down and he started reading. And he got as far as where Jesus Christ says, what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and yet lose his very soul? And Tom Terrants realized for the first time in his life that he was a sinner. That what he was doing was wrong. That the racism he was guilty of offended God, not just other people. And he was wrong. And he got down on his knees in his cell and he gave his life to Jesus Christ. The change in his life was profound. So profound, everyone in the prison heard about it. Edgar Hoover heard about it. If you've seen the film J. Edgar Hoover, you'll understand why he heard about it. He heard most things those days. So Hoover sent the agent who masterminded this entire operation to Tom Terrants with the orders to interview him and send him a personal report on what had happened to Tom Terrants. Now, that agent went on later to write his own book. From the moment he walked into that cell, he says, I knew I was looking at a different man. So profound was the change in Tom Terrants' life that 2 months later, he himself became a Christian. As Tom was in the cell, he wrote to the 26 men who'd been appointed to shoot him that day, apologizing for putting their lives in danger and asking if he could meet with them. 22 of them agreed, and 21 of them became Christians. On his eventual release from prison, he began to tour around North America, speaking about racial reconciliation and equality, and how wrong he had been, and how gracious Jesus Christ was. Jesus Christ changes hearts. What a wretched man I am, Paul said. Who will rescue me from this body of death? Thanks be to God through Jesus Christ. That's what it means to be a Christian, to have your heart change.